Welcome back, America. I'm Hugh Hewitt, joined by United States Senator Tom Cotton, strong supporter of Israel. Good morning, Senator. How are you?
Good morning, Hugh. It's good to be on with you. I guess I'm as well as can be expected given the perilous state of the world.
It is a perilous state of the world. I want to begin by asking you about urban warfare and how long you expect this to take. You have actually walked point on a platoon in Baghdad during the surge, so you have a little idea of what the Israeli Defense Forces are up against when they go into Gaza City proper. They're not there yet. How long do you expect their operation to destroy Hamas to take?
As long as it takes, Hugh. I suspect that Prime Minister Netanyahu and his war cabinet, Yoav Gallant, the defense minister, and Benny Gantz, the leader of the opposition, like all Israelis, would borrow a line from U.S. Grant in the summer of 1864. They plan to fight it out on this line all summer long if that's what it takes. And I expect they plan to fight it out in Gaza for as long as it takes to destroy Hamas, not just as a military or terrorist organization, but as a governing entity and a social movement. And what they face in Gaza is much more complex, Hugh, than what we faced in Baghdad, certainly what we faced by 2006 when I was there, and it had been largely pacified, and you're facing an insurgency. Gaza is armed to the teeth. They've been laying in wait now for 17 years for a moment like this, with one big variable that Baghdad didn't have, which is the hundreds of kilometers of tunnels underneath Gaza. So it's going to be deliberate, and it's going to take some time, but we have to back Israel to the hilt as they fight this war to finally destroy Hamas once and for all.
Do you think President Biden has articulated the length and depth and width of our support accurately? Because it's not what we've seen in the past. We can't just say 4 weeks and you're done, Israel. That happened under previous presidents. This is going to take a long time, Senator. Has President Biden outlined why and how we will stand with Israel throughout that time?
No, Hugh, not in the least. President Biden is already waffling and wavering barely 3 weeks after the worst massacre of Jews since the Holocaust. I mean, we're just in the preparatory phases of this war, Hugh. The ground operation is only now in its earliest phase. Yet over the weekend, you have President Biden once again putting so-called humanitarian aid before Israel's security needs. Hugh, just so your listeners know, humanitarian aid to Gaza under current conditions is nothing more than resupply to Hamas. Hamas is the governing authority in Gaza. When aid is sent to Gaza, it's not diverted by Hamas. It's not commandeered by Hamas. It is accepted by Hamas. And yes, there are women and children and nursing infants in Gaza. Does anyone really think that they will be first in line for the water and the food and the medicine that we're supposed to send to Gaza? No, of course it will go to Hamas fighters who need it to fight or who need it to recover from injuries in this war. So under no conditions should President Biden be demanding that Israel provide humanitarian aid to Gaza or even open Gaza for humanitarian aid. And certainly U.S. taxpayers should not provide it. I mean, no one expected us to provide aid to Germany or Japan in World War II. Why would we do that for Gaza in this war? And then second, Hugh, after President Biden this weekend put the humanitarian aid for Gaza, which again is resupply for Hamas ahead of Israel's security needs, he gave another patronizing lecture to Israel about the need to fight in accordance with so-called international law. Look, Israel, of course, fights in accordance with international law. Frankly, they bend over backwards and do a lot more than most nations would, and that they're required to under those international customs and norms and traditions. But Hamas is responsible for civilian casualties when they place military targets on civilian sites like mosques or hospitals or schools. And while Israel doesn't go out of its way to target civilians, nor should it accept one bit of risk more for a single soldier in the IDF to avoid a civilian casualty because of Hamas.
Senator, I want to turn now to the domestic front. Our alma mater has disgraced itself in the 3 weeks since the massacre of 10/7. But many colleges and universities have, most recently Cornell, where the Cornell police said to Jewish students, don't go to the kosher dining hall, we can't keep you safe. Have you seen the Office of Civil Rights at the Department of Education or the Division of Civil Rights at the Department of Justice announce the opening of even one investigation in these 3 weeks?
No, Hugh, I haven't. To my knowledge, they have not. Maybe it's possible, but you know what we certainly haven't seen? We certainly haven't seen a self-congratulatory press conference by Merrick Garland and other left-wing ideologues in the Department of Justice or the Department of Education announcing that they will investigate and hold accountable these vicious anti-Semites the way we did, for instance, when they announced investigations into Governor Brian Kemp of Georgia and his legislature for taking such terrible actions as expanding the number of drop boxes that a county could have during early voting. So if this was a priority for the Biden administration, they would be out having press conferences and dislocating their shoulder by patting themselves on the back so hard. What that tells you is that it's not a priority. And why is it not a priority? Because a substantial minority of the Democratic voting base is openly anti-Semitic. Look at all of these pro-Hamas anti-Semites who are marching on campuses at places like Harvard and Columbia and Cornell, who are terrifying Jewish students, forcing them to hide in libraries or elsewhere. Who do you think those people are the shock troops for? Those are the people who are out marching in the streets during the BLM riots in 2020. Those are the people that Democrats are counting on to mobilize the vote in many communities across their voting coalition. That's why Joe Biden is already waffling and wavering, in part, because he's terrified at the polls that show his collapse in approval rating among Democrats, not among independents and Republicans, but among Democrats. So, no, there is, to my knowledge, not a single investigation going on. And even if there is an investigation at the Department of Justice and the Department of Education into this outbreak of anti-Semitism, they're certainly not celebrating it. They're not trumpeting it. They're not highlighting it at press conferences the way they do investigations into Republicans.
You know, in 1986, when I was at the Office of Personnel Management, I got scrambled to go down to do a voting rights observation in Yazoo City, Mississippi. And we mobilized, we're on the ground in 48 hours, because that's what you have to do to secure voting rights in 1986 in Yazoo City. I have not seen the dispatch of any investigators to Cornell, to Harvard, from either the Department of Education or the Department of Justice to observe and report back to decide whether or not those universities are doing their jobs. Do you think there will be a hearing on this, Senator?
Well, something tells me, Hugh, that we're not going to have a hearing in the Senate controlled by Chuck Schumer and Dick Durbin and Bernie Sanders, of all people, and our oversight of the Department of Justice and the Department of Education. But I'm confident that the Republican-led House of Representatives will be looking into it. Again, the reason they're not taking these steps, or at least that they're not highlighting and trumpeting these steps as aggressively as the example you cited, or the steps they took to investigate Republicans over the last 3 years, is because they don't want to further antagonize their substantial anti-Semitic bloc of voters. And that's just a simple fact, Hugh. I mean, look, it's not the Republican Party that sends people like Rashida Tlaib and Ilhan Omar to Congress. It's the Democratic Party. And on campuses, some of the most left-wing places in this country where we've seen this outbreak of anti-Semitic pro-Hamas activism, again, that's the base of the Democratic Party. That's why Joe Biden and his administration is not manning the ramparts against it.
Senator, I want to switch to guns for a moment. In the aftermath of the slaughter in Maine last week, I've been trying to figure out how the NICS system works, and I understand if you attempt to purchase a weapon and you have a felony conviction, an admission of a drug conviction or addiction, mental illness or institutionalization, domestic violence, harassment or stalking, or you are under charge or you are a fugitive, you can be denied a weapon. And this individual, this killer in Maine, attempted to buy, I believe, a silencer in Maine and was denied. My question is, what happens after you're denied? Does the gun seller have to tell the police or anything, or are you just denied?
Well, Hugh, because I don't know many of the details about this terrible murder in Maine. I don't want to get too far into those details. I want to extend my condolences to all Mainers, to include my friends and colleagues, Susan Collins and Angus King, and the Mainers they represent. As is often the case in these mass murders, the person appears to have obtained the gun legally, despite a significant history of mental illness or other troubling facts that should have been caught by the NICS system, that should have been reported. So, again, I don't want to get too far in the details or lay blame or assign responsibility yet. I think we need to let all the facts come to light. But no, under these circumstances, as I understand them, I think the laws and the systems in place should have been enough to stop this man from obtaining weapons. Again, that's my kind of high-level understanding, subject to further understanding of the facts as they come out.
Senator, to your knowledge, have we had the manifesto from the Nashville shooter released yet?
No, this is the transgendered person who shot up a Christian school, who supposedly within a day or two we learned had written a manifesto. I've not seen that come out at public at all, which is unusual. Typically, when these kind of shootings happen, they're released. That's why it leads to so much suspicion among many Americans that it probably is something that doesn't play into the media and the Democratic Party's favored storylines about these shootings. And therefore, they go to great lengths to try to keep it private. Again, I don't know. I haven't seen it. But many Americans see these trends and tendencies and become very skeptical about the secrecy of our authorities.
Last question, Senator. The administrative state is vast. It's enormous. How in the world do people get their faith back, whether it's the CDC or the FDA or the Department of Education Office of Civil Rights or any Department of Justice persecution of Donald Trump? How do they get their faith back in the federal government?
Well, it takes some accountability, Hugh, and that accountability is not going to come until we have a Republican president. And then there needs to be a substantial house cleaning at the senior reaches of many of these agencies, in addition to a broader effort to rein in their power. These agencies are not run by people elected by Americans to represent their views. That's the president, and that's 535 members of Congress. And there needs to be a substantial effort, which will only happen when Republicans are back in charge, to hold them accountable, to impose more future accountability to the president and to the Congress on them, so they are no longer unaccountable, in effect, lawmakers setting their own policy for the country or abusing the authority that they do have.
Senator Tom Cotton, always a pleasure to talk to you. Follow him on Twitter at @SendTomCotton, the site formerly known as Twitter, now known as X, @SendTomCotton. Thank you, Senator.